The Netherlands is a known tax haven, or so everyone says. Numerous videos on YouTube and NGO reports cover this topic. However, what does this mean? It's common knowledge that big corporations use tax havens to shift profits across borders to minimize the amount they pay, but many countries' laws and financial systems help this. The Netherlands alone enables $51 billion in global corporate tax avoidance annually, largely due to its banking system. Big corporations use Dutch banks to shift profits to lesser taxed regions, leaving smaller businesses and regular taxpayers to cover the bill of social services. But how exactly do banks even help companies dodge taxes legally? In this video, we will answer this question and discuss the Dutch banking sector's role in one of the world's biggest tax avoidance networks. Last year, I was part of a project commissioned by the Eerlijke Bankwijzer, or in English, the Dutch Fair Bank Guide, to evaluate and assess the Dutch banking system and its role in tax avoidance, its structure, and encourage social responsibility of the Dutch banks studied. The Dutch Fair Bank Guide is not just one entity, but a collection of organizations, namely Amnesty International, Milieu Defense, Oxfam Novib, PAX, and World Animal Protection. This project looked at 8 different Dutch banks, giving each a score on their anti-tax avoidance policies and bringing to light how Dutch banks are involved with companies known for tax avoidance and using the Netherlands specifically. Why does a report like this matter? Simply put, multinational companies do not act in isolation. A bank is an important partner in enabling multinational companies' business. So if a multinational corporation is underpaying its taxes, it can be partially responsible for enabling unfair corporate gains at the cost of the rest of society. This cost disproportionately affects lower income countries that need these public funds the most. The Netherlands, despite being a relatively small country geographically, is densely populated and a highly wealthy country. According to the World Bank, the small country has a GDP per capita of $64,000, significantly higher than the GDP per capita of the entire European Union, which is only $41,000. However, despite being a high-income country, the Netherlands has a reputation of aiding tax avoidance schemes. According to the 2021 Corporate Tax Haven Index, the Netherlands ranked 4th and was only behind other tax havens such as the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. However, why do these big corporations love the Netherlands for tax avoidance? One of the main reasons is the Dutch network of tax treaties. Tax treaties are simply agreements between the Netherlands and other countries that decide who gets to tax what. These treaties, meant to prevent companies from being taxed twice on the same income, can be a goldmine for multinational corporations looking to minimize their tax bills. Why? Because Dutch tax treaties are unusually restrictive. They limit how much countries can tax the profits that Dutch multinationals earn there. This means that by using treaties, a company can shift its profits to the Netherlands and beyond, to islands such as Bermuda, where the tax burden is lighter or even zero. Essentially, they avoid paying the higher taxes where they make their money and move it to lower tax regions using the Netherlands as a vehicle. This means that where a company buys and sells its goods and services may not be where it is ultimately taxed, and it can shop around for a better deal. However, to access these perks, companies must establish a presence in the Netherlands. This requirement sounds restrictive on paper, but in many cases, all you need for this presence is a letterbox company, also known as a shell company. This company is often just a legal address, doesn't really need any real employees, offices, or operations, and their main goal is for channeling profits through the Netherlands financially, while following their legal obligations. Big corporations often use shell companies to move their profits, and it requires very minimum setup, making it look like their money was earned there instead of where the actual business occurs. Despite an empty office, they channel billions in profits, making them a key part of the tax avoidance game. This tactic is ultimately known as treaty shopping. It's like browsing through a catalog of different tax treaties to find the one that cuts you the best deal. Multinationals set up shell companies in the Netherlands, exploit tax treaties, funnel the untaxed profits, while staying within the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. This practice of tax avoidance is legal and different than tax evasion, which is the illegal act of reducing payments by hiding income in offshore bank accounts or refraining from reporting income. Instead, multinationals legally avoid tax by using this system and finding loopholes in the law to pay as little tax as possible, against the best intention of lawmakers. All of this makes the Netherlands a major hub for global tax avoidance, helping multinationals save billions at the expense of social programs and country's tax revenue. So, we've discussed how the Netherlands tax treaties make it possible for big corporations to avoid taxes. However, companies don't make it this far without the help of one player: Dutch banks. The banks offering services to corporate tax avoiders facilitate tax avoidance. To determine which Dutch banks facilitate the most tax avoidance, the Dutch Fair Banking Guide report evaluates which Dutch banks offer services to every company found in investigations to be avoiding taxes through the Netherlands that were published between 2019 and 2023. This was a total of 26 companies. When I refer to services provided to tax avoiders, this is not just that banks hold money. They act as gatekeepers, often facilitating various services that make the schemes possible in the first place. Dutch banks that maintain 6 key types of financial relationships with tax avoiding companies are as follows. 1, they can hold shares. By holding a share, a bank buys a portion of a company either for itself or its clients. By doing this, the bank is not just investing its money in the company, but legitimizing the company's actions. And by this report, ABN Amro and ING held shares of 16 out of the 26 identified tax-avoiding companies. Secondly, banks can hold bonds. Bonds are basically loans that companies use to raise money. When a Dutch bank holds its bonds, it is essentially financing the company's tax avoidance strategies. For instance, ABN Amro invested $2.6 million in bonds for Bharti Airtel, a company that uses Dutch shell companies to avoid 21 million euros in Ugandan taxes. Next is account holding, the most basic but essential service. Many of these tax-avoiding companies have financial accounts with Dutch banks. For example, Cargill, the largest privately owned company in the United States, has accounts with ABN Amro, ING, and Rabobank. Cargill uses Dutch shell companies to shift profits to Luxembourg, where they pay little to no tax. But it doesn't stop there. Dutch banks also help by facilitating bond issuance, which is the process of bringing bonds to market. The service is really like stamping a seal of approval on a company's debt, making it easier to raise money for them and ultimately avoid more taxes. ABN Amro played a significant role in helping a Brazilian oil giant Petrobras issue bonds through its Dutch subsidiary, a move designed to avoid millions in Brazilian taxes. Similarly, banks can also help by facilitating loan issuance. This is more than handing out credit, it's more about restructuring massive loan terms, sometimes billions of dollars, to fit the company's tax strategies. For instance, ING was part of a $10 billion loan deal for General Electric, which used Dutch subsidiaries to funnel untaxed profits to Luxembourg, Ireland, and Bermuda. Finally, the most controversial part is that they can directly involve themselves in companies avoiding taxes. This happens when a bank is not just providing normal services, but actively helping design or support the tax avoidance structures. The report found that ING had direct ties to specific entities used for tax avoidance in at least 11 cases. ABN AMRO helped the defense company MBDA channel €500 million in profits tax-free through Dutch shell company. Without the support, most of these tax schemes would just fall apart. So what does this all mean? This means that banks like ING are not passive observers in the tax avoidance game. They're active players. Their involvement with 17 of the 26 companies investigated makes them significant enablers of corporate tax avoidance in the Netherlands. Taken together, it's a combination of not just loopholes in tax treaties, but the active role of the Dutch bank that helps multinationals move profits untaxed. At the same time, the gains brought to multinational companies cause regular people and small businesses to pick up the bill for all the public services they use. But how does this practice work in real life? Next, we'll dive into some real-life cases that show how these schemes work in practice. Let's examine 2 real-life case studies, one using Pfizer and the other using Bharti Airtel, to see how these schemes operate. During the pandemic, Pfizer made $21.6 billion in profit from its COVID-19 vaccine. Nevertheless, instead of paying taxes where the profits were earned, Pfizer routed nearly all of it through a Dutch shell company called CP Pharmaceuticals International CV. The result? Pfizer paid only a 9.3% tax on all those profits, far below the corporate tax rates in the US or the EU, or even the new 15% global minimum tax. Simply put, a massive chunk of Pfizer's vaccine profits bypassed tax authorities altogether. This is especially controversial because Pfizer's vaccine was co-developed with public funding. Taxpayer dollars funded university research that Pfizer used to develop this vaccine. Governments spent billions buying the doses, only for Pfizer to channel its profits through the Netherlands and pay minimal tax. As Vincent Kiezebrink from SOMO said, this looks like a robbery. Critics argue that this tax avoidance scheme hurts public budgets and raises serious ethical concerns about how pandemic profits were managed. Tax justice advocates and lawmakers point out that Pfizer's tax avoidance is part of an ongoing pattern. The People's Vaccine Alliance reports that Pfizer and other vaccine makers made obscene profits from the taxpayer-funded COVID-19 vaccines while paying very little tax, calling the model devastating for global public health. In the United States, a Senate Finance Committee investigation found that Pfizer's global effective tax rate plunged to these single digits in recent years and demanded answers for how a US-based pharma giant ended up paying a tax rate lower than many teachers or firefighters, but didn't go much further than that. Nevertheless, Pfizer is not the only company that has used Dutch shell companies to cut its tax bills. Multinationals across different sectors exploit the same loopholes, making the Netherlands one of the biggest hubs for profit shifting. Bharti Airtel, an Indian telecom giant, used a Dutch detour tax loophole to avoid paying 21 million euros in Ugandan taxes. Here's how that worked. Airtel's Ugandan division sent its profits to the Netherlands to take advantage of a 2004 tax treaty that eliminated taxes on dividends to Dutch entities. Without this loophole, Airtel would have owed Uganda 15% in corporate tax. However, by using Dutch shell companies, the company managed to pay nothing. This is a blatant example of treaty shopping, where Airtel set up shops in the Netherlands to exploit its tax treaty with Uganda, which was designed to prevent double taxation and encourage investments, but it ended up creating zero tax scenarios. Specifically, once Airtel Uganda's division became profitable in 2017, the company re-registered it under Dutch subsidiaries. Over the next 3 years, Airtel routed about 170 million euros in Ugandan profits through the Netherlands, allowing it to avoid roughly 21 million euros in Ugandan corporate taxes. The foregone 21 million euros is a significant loss for Uganda's budget. To put it in perspective, that amount could have paid for 20,000 teachers for a year. Local advocates call such tax dodging morally disgusting, as it deprives a lower income country of necessary funds for education and healthcare, while a multinational profits from its market. Airtel's use of the Dutch detour means the company benefits from Ugandan consumers, but withholds its contributions to Uganda's development that it otherwise would have had to pay. Airtel's not alone. Other firms do the same Dutch detour. According to the Dutch Central Bank, of the 1.5 billion euros in foreign investment from the Netherlands into Uganda in 2019, only 0.2% was actually of Dutch origin. This indicates that most of the capital was foreign capital considered to be Dutch because it passed through Dutch shell companies. In sum, Uganda's case illustrates how corporate tax avoidance via Dutch entities can siphon much needed revenue from developing countries. This funding could otherwise support public services like education, teacher salaries, or healthcare. The Dutch Fair Finance Guide and other NGOs are using such findings to urge reforms in tax treaties and create greater corporate tax responsibilities in both host and conduit countries. So what do these cases tell us? They show us how Dutch tax treaties and shell companies are not just about avoiding double taxation. They are about avoiding taxes altogether. For Pfizer, it meant paying almost nothing in pandemic profits. For Airtel, it meant dodging millions that could have funded schools in Uganda. And behind it all, Dutch banks provide the services it takes to make these schemes possible. This brings us to the next part. Who's responsible and what can be done about this? To answer this, we need to seriously evaluate 3 key players: Dutch banks, the Dutch government, and the multinationals themselves. First, let's talk about the banks, the subject of this video. As discussed earlier, banks like ING and Bunq are not passive bystanders. They are active enablers of the tax schemes, providing the loans, accounts, and financial know-how to allow multinationals to shift profits untaxed. However, when confronted, these banks often claim they follow the rules, and technically they're right. No laws are broken by their tax avoidance schemes, but they do so without transparency requirements, and the practices continue unchecked over time. Nevertheless, the banks are not the only ones to blame. The Dutch government has written the rules that make all of it possible. For decades, the Netherlands has pursued a quote-unquote tax competitive policy, which is a nice way of saying let's attract businesses by making it easy to avoid taxes. So this leads to what result? The Netherlands becoming a hub for shell companies with over 12,000 registered entities that exist mainly to channel untaxed profits to lower tax jurisdictions. With international pressure, the Dutch government has slowly adapted these policies and reformed them, but progress is still slow. Even when new rules were introduced, like the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, ATAD, the Netherlands has been accused of implementing them only half-heartedly. The Netherlands tax system still has enough loopholes to still maintain its role as a global hub for financial money diversions. But why allow a system that clearly facilitates tax avoidance? Well, it's not just about loopholes. The government of the Netherlands also profits indirectly from its system. Dutch banks and law firms charge billions by setting up and maintaining these structures. Moreover, that money then gets put into the hands of the wealthy, which contribute to the Dutch economy. This creates a conflict of interest. Why close these loopholes when they're so profitable? Of course, not only are the banks and the government responsible for this system, the third player, multinationals themselves, ultimately are the ones choosing to use the tax schemes. While their spokespeople will argue that they have a fiduciary duty to minimize taxes, critics say that that's just an excuse for maximizing profits at any cost. As long as it's legal and saves money, these companies will keep using Dutch shell companies to shift profits to untaxed jurisdictions. Therefore, solving the problem requires action on all fronts, from the banks, governments, and the companies themselves. So what can be done? More transparency, for one. Dutch banks should be required to disclose all financial services they provide to companies involved in tax avoidance schemes. Transparency alone would make it harder to hide these practices. Secondly, they could reform tax treaties. Dutch government could close the loopholes in the tax treaties that allow multinationals to shift profits to untaxed regions. This includes a minimum tax clause, which would ensure companies pay their fair share when they do operate. Thirdly, we, as citizens, could pressure multinationals. Governments and NGOs can name and shame multinational corporations exploiting the Dutch tax laws. Public pressure can therefore be a powerful tool for forcing change. Lastly, through international cooperation. This problem isn't just a Dutch problem. It's a global problem. The OECD's global minimum tax proposal is a step in the right direction, but it's only as strong as the companies that enforce it. Without genuine commitment, it's really just words on a paper. So will anything change? On one hand, there's a growing movement from tax justice advocates and international organizations to push for reforms. On the other hand, some banks, multinationals, and even the Dutch government have little incentive to close loopholes. Without absolute transparency and international cooperation, it's hard to imagine the Netherlands will give up its spot as one of the world's biggest tax havens anytime soon. Nevertheless, the change might be possible if enough pressure from voters, activists, and other governments occur. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe for more in-depth analyses. Moreover, let us know in the comments, who's most responsible for the system? The banks, the government, or the companies themselves? As a disclaimer, I was not the sole creator of the report that inspired this video, and I have left out a lot of strong data from the Dutch Fairbank Guide to make these findings more accessible and entertaining. Furthermore, this video was created without permission from the member organizations of the original report and does not necessarily reflect the opinions of the members, nor do the opinions expressed in this video necessarily reflect my own. This video was created for informational and entertainment purposes only.